National Defense Authorization Act that was signed into law last month by President Biden eliminated the COVID shot mandate for service members. That's good news. But we still have a problem. At least 7 Coast Guard cadets that were discharged last fall have not been reinstated despite a last-ditch effort for approval to start a new semester. And there are many other service members who remain in limbo as their military separation was ordered before the new law, but have not yet been carried out. So with a new law in place, how in the world is this type of thing allowed to happen? And are we going to see more of this with more service members? Joining me to discuss this and more is Vice Admiral William Lee. Admiral Lee, thank you again for joining us. Welcome back to Washington Watch.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is an important subject to me.
Well, it is to all of us. I mean, here we have an NDA signed by the president last month. Supposedly, it eliminates the mandate for the COVID shot for our military personnel, and it is now law. So why in the world is this thing still happening?
Well, that is a great question. But as you and I well know, it takes a large bureaucracy a while to catch up to its wrongs. And so right now, what they're trying to do, I suspect, up inside the Pentagon and by extension thereof, the Coast Guard, which, as you know, is a department under the Department of Homeland Security, but we're in lockstep with those guys policy-wise. And so I think they're just trying to get all their ducks in a row right now and figure out how they're going to manage this now that the mandate has been rescinded. And first and foremost for me, because this whole thing started back in September when I took on the mission of trying to get those 7 cadets reinstated to the academy because they were being treated differently than the cadets at the other service academies. All the other cadets at West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy got to stay in class while ours were expelled. And I just want to get them back on campus so that they can get their commission and serve their country, which is their desire, and go to their graduation ceremony whenever it happens. Over.
Well, thank you so much for the efforts that you're making in behalf of them. And we're all keenly aware that your efforts not only impact those 7 cadets, but many, many others. But as you mentioned, you are in very close contact, communication with these 7 cadets at the Coast Guard that the Coast Guard is refusing to reinstate. What's their mindset right now? How are they holding up?
Well, they were depressed in the beginning because obviously their dreams had been crushed, but they have a lawyer who's the guy that reached out to me, got me involved in it, and then by extension thereof, this organization called stars.us, whom I had never heard of before this, but the bottom line is we formed a small coalition of like-minded people, most of them retired officers, and we started writing letters and doing news interviews such as this, and also contacted members of Congress. And ultimately, after 3 months of this, we finally got enough attention that those great elected representatives of ours got it written into law, and the rest is history.
Well, we hope it's history. It is still disturbing that we're having reports like the Coast Guard refusing to reinstate these cadets. And actually, I'm sure you're aware there are other reports of other service members that are experiencing some punitive damage and treatment, even though they perhaps have been allowed to remain in the service, they're still experiencing some punishment. Are you aware of some of these other cases?
I'm very aware of them. I have been contacted by a litany of men and women from all across the board, the spectrum of the services, with stories of woe. And it breaks your heart because many of them have served for 18, 19 years. And they were within, a few months or a year or two of retirement. And then they've been held in kind of captivity in limbo for the last 18 months, wondering if they were going to have a job or not. And there's stress associated with that. So they are very grateful for the efforts of our elected representatives and our small coalition for at least keeping those guys from getting discharged. Now what we've got to do is focus on those that were already discharged, which those numbers are in the thousands if you add them up across all of the services. And I'm hoping that the Congress can also make sure that they get restored and made whole again, if that makes any sense. Over.
It makes all the sense in the world, and we're all here pulling for you. Yeah, it seems, Admiral, as though this type of behavior is not by accident. And you hate to say that. You hate to even allow your mind to go down that avenue. But this does seem so intentional. Here we have a drug that was not even tested properly. There were a lot of legitimate reasons for people to be fearful of taking it. And now we have a law that says it's no longer a mandate, and yet some of these individuals are still being forced to take it. What is your thought as to why this attitude is being portrayed?
Well, I can tell you that in the beginning, I can fully understand why the mandate was put in place. I mean, we were in extremis, so to speak, in the military services. Now, I was already retired at that point, but truth be known, I would have done the same thing if I had been in charge of a major command back then, because you got to stay ready. But as we learned more about the efficacy of the vaccine and we became more knowledgeable, and by the way, when about 97, 98% of the workforce was already vaccinated, and we got on the other side of this thing, then we needed to take another look at it. And so while I don't hold them in contempt in any way, shape, or form for what began as a righteous cause, what I question is why they stuck with it so long at the expense of what started out as a readiness issue turned into another type of readiness issue, because they were expelling people that they needed when they can't find enough people at the recruiting offices to backfill the jobs, the vacancies that they're leaving, if that makes any sense.
Well, it absolutely does. Admiral, listen, we want to thank you for coming back on Washington Watch with us. So many of these guardsmen there's so much is invested in these service members, and that certainly ought to be a factor in all of this as well. But thank you for joining us tonight on Washington Watch. As always, we appreciate your efforts.